Okay. Gonna have to cough right away. Welcome, everybody. Good to see everybody. Was gonna go on and get started since it's 8, and yeah, we've got a lot of slides and things, demos. So we'll just get centered and get relaxed first. So get your pencil, paper out. Yeah, we're gonna get our seat adjusted. Gonna make sure we're comfortable, paying a little attention to our body position to start. See that we're seated comfortably on a chair or wherever we're seated. Noticing the weight, noticing the distribution, noticing our balance on that. And also noticing where our feet are, if they're nicely planted on the ground or if we're got our foot up on a step or a part of the chair. Making sure we're comfortable with that, not putting too much pressure on our lower back or anything. And sitting comfortably, not too hunched over maybe. Making sure our shoulders are comfortable, maybe give them a stretch. Neck is comfortable. Give a deep breath there. Pay attention to our arms. Noticing how we're supporting our arms. If we're resting our forearm or our wrist or hand on the table, where that weight is residing. Then we're going to pick up the pencil. Noticing, the grip we take. If we take regular, like a writing pencil grip, or maybe we use a different grip to get a different part of the tip of the pencil. Or maybe we use our other hand, non-dominant hand, trying that out. This first set of marks are just experimental, so just do it just for the bodily sensation. And noticing the grip we're using. Do we holding it really tight or can we hold it loosely? And as we put the pencil down, we notice the pressure pushing down on the page. Can be anything, but yeah, just as long as we notice it. And then moving the pencil, again, the pressure, the speed, but also paying attention to the feeling that it creates. Does it glide smoothly? Is there a roughness to the paper? Are we moving the pencil with our fingers? Are we turning our hand? Rotating the wrist? Is it from the elbow? Is it from the shoulder? What muscles are involved? And if we just turn a small part, do we also feel it somewhere else? Like if I turn my wrist, sometimes I feel in my back muscles kind of supporting that. So this is the time just to notice that. Just to get familiar. And also if you make a little change or allow yourself to try dip marks in a different way, notice how that changes all of that. And even so far as when you make the change or if you're just drawing regular, what's coming up? What's coming up? What are you thinking about what you're doing? Are you happy with what you're doing? Are you expecting something from what you're doing? Are you nervous about what you're doing? Just whatever it is, it's fine. Just to notice it is the key. See who you are by what you think about what it is you're doing. So many times that comes up like every day. What is this I'm doing? Drawing on paper. Who is it I think I am drawing on paper? What is it I think I'm doing? Yeah, so just making marks. And at this point, making whatever marks you want. If you have a practice already, otherwise just let it go free. Putting your attention right on the point of that pencil. Being the passive observer of the marks as they emerge from that point onto the paper. That smear of graphite coming along, being just an observer of it. Say, what is this robot hand making these marks? It's interesting. What's it doing? Can be a very comfortable groove. Yeah, let's spend the hour doing that. That's it's pretty. Can be pretty joyful, pretty relaxing. Hopefully can get some relaxation. If you feel tightness, just notice that you feel tightness, or if you feel nervous or uncomfortable, just notice that. Say if you give it some attention, let it speak to you. Seeking that joy in this process, just fun, especially this warm up. Really just no pressure. It's really just observer. It's getting that buffer set up, getting deep into it. So we'll be doing several practice exercises. Just getting warmed up for that. And you can follow them. You don't have to follow them. If you are comfortable with your drawing practice and you want to continue, that's great. Hopefully, when I'm showing pictures or demos, if you want to keep doing what you're doing, that's cool. Hopefully, you'll just keep working while I'm talking somewhere in the background of your peripheral awareness, feeding in subconscious information, which will later bubble up when you're making a drawing. Oh, yeah, that's what he was talking about. Okay. Still people coming. This is good. This was what it was like at School of Visual Arts. I'd start the class, and then all the kids would come in with their coffee, finishing their cigarettes, this kind of thing. Art school stuff. So no problem. I could just talk through a windstorm. Not a big deal. Okay, so I'm going to show some pictures first. A couple of pictures. That's the picture that Chris Alexander picked out. Use this one for contrast. I should say, like, contrast and gradients is what we're going to talk about. And those are two different properties. And I decided to combine them, and I'll tell you why in a few minutes. But the main reason is they just seem to be two ways of looking at the same thing. And they come up so often together. It's interesting to consider them as separate properties because each one has its own quality to it. And I think that's why he separated them. And I do feel like all the properties are really just different aspects of the same wholeness that he talks about, just different ways of looking at the wholeness. So in some ways, all 15 are this sort of pointing to the same thing. But he uses this bowl, especially for the design, I think, for the contrast, the white stripes and the black stripes kind of mixed together. But this picture also has many of the other qualities. I would say good shape is one that's pretty evident. And it has a kind of a calmness to it, an inner calm. There's a beautiful boundary at the bottom for the base. And the rim also, I think, is a nice center. There's kind of a black line around the rim. But also gradients is there, and in this way, it's not about the lightness to darkness, but it's the broad to thin. There's a gradient from the top to the bottom as it gets wider to more narrow, or more narrow to wider toward the top. So there's all the properties can really be found in anything. And it's just the degree to which one of those properties, brings it toward wholeness more. And contrast is a good one here. So here is why I think the two are different parts are very closely aligned, the two properties. And I'm going to show some drawing and a couple of techniques similar to that I did in earlier classes, in realistic drawing classes. So I won't spend too much time on it, but it's worth it to show. So at the bottom, you see a scale, a brightness scale, a value scale that goes from completely white to completely black. And we'll construct that. That's a gradient. That's a normal definition, I think, of a gradient, light to dark. That's how people think about it. And you can see how important the gradients are, shading from the highlight to the shadow, especially, but also in the background, the gradient is useful, and on the surface, going from the lights to the darks. So gradients are a way to move in kind of a smooth set of values, a smooth set of brightness changes from light to dark or dark to light. And contrast, I would say, is a way to move abruptly between the two. So this edge of the highlight to the background is a great contrast between the dark and the light. They're very close together, like the black and white stripes. So yeah, contrast would be abrupt change in brightness value or brightness, and gradient would be smooth change. There's a lot of value placed in art on the very smooth gradients, and a lot of times art schools have tests to get in where students have to shade and form these value.
Hey John, just a question.
Yeah.
Is the contrast there more for aesthetic value? Because it's not realistic, isn't it? Like, why would you have a contrast there necessarily?
I'm not sure what you mean by more.
Oh, I said the contrast there, the black and white, um, like, is that contrast that's more like the creative aesthetics reason people do that, but not because if it's a realistic drawing, um, like that like I can see the light gradient change is realistic, reflect what the actual object is, but the contrast seems not that way.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure. A lot of times the contrast is used in a drawing like this, especially next to the highlight, to emphasize the edge there. It's a way to define the edge without having to draw a line. It's a way to define the edge with a shape. So maybe this could be a realistic drawing condition. I don't know. It's a study, I would say. That's what we're going to do. So it's definitely not made to be 100% realistic of a sphere there, but it's meant to show how gradients can be used on a curved surface to emphasize the form. And the same way, the contrast can be used on the outside of the curved surface to emphasize the form. Because here, it's so bright, you want to show it's so bright that you don't want to even draw a line there. Okay, let me try to switch over. there's people still coming. Okay. Oh yeah, that's it. Sorry. There we go. Okay. Hang on. Okay, so the sound might change a little.
John, if you're talking, we can't hear you. I don't know if you're talking or not.
How's that? Can you hear me now? Okay,
Yes.
good. Sorry. I said it. I bring you this at great expense. I said it takes me the two camera setup, but when I draw like that, I think it's a little easier to see, and it's easier for me to draw than drawing on the computer, which is harder. Okay, so we're going to divide this. We're going to get 5 boxes. Okay. And the first box is going to leave empty. Then this box, we're going to just draw vertical lines in. We did this exercise earlier in one of the first classes, but I want to go back over it. It's a simple way to create a value gradient. You can make the lines a little more contrasty. So we fill all but the first box with vertical lines. And then, so we skip the first one and make all the rest of them vertical. Then we skip the second one and we make the rest of them with vertical and horizontal. So the third one is vertical and horizontal, then all the rest of them. And then the next one we're going to do, we're gonna go 1, 2, 3. On the fourth one, we're gonna do a diagonal left to right. We fill those last 2 left to right. And on the very last one, we're gonna do a diagonal right to left. So we sort of got 4 directions of lines. That's a really simple, systematic way to do a value gradient. And if you want to make one more and just kind of completely fill it in black, get a real black, that's okay too. Now on that one, I'm just kind of doing I don't know, a little scribbly pattern. And if you're comfortable, you can go and do all of them that way. You can just divide a rectangle into a set of boxes, however many different steps you'd like, and just begin to fill them in. And you can even use this as a guide. You can make another rectangle below it and fill them in all different ways. You don't have to use the regular cross-hatching. And it's a good practice to learn the pressure of the pencil that you would need, the width of the point, how you would turn it, and the tightness of the little scribbles, or however you decide to do it, the tightness of the lines to get the variations in brightness. That's how you construct a simple gradient. Okay, I want to talk about edges and lines because a lot of times, actually Ellen was talking about this, one of her goals was to do her watercolor without drawing the lines, which is to say she wanted to create her shapes using edges. She wanted to create the definition of her shape using the edges. And I think we were using watercolor. Is that right, Ellen? Yeah, watercolor. Yeah, so she was going to use a watercolor brush to create edges. So a lot of times you see, especially in beginning drawing, but all the time you can see that the contours are done with heavy lines, heavy outlines, and then some kind of shading within the heavy outline. And what's nice is to be able to create an edge, which is not a line, and I'll show some ways to do. So I'm just going to put down some pigment. I'm using an ebony pencil, which I've talked about before. It's a Prismacolor ebony, which is a nice kind of jet black, smooth, very smooth graphite pencil. Okay. I also have a variety of others. Just quickly say, if you've noticed on the pencils, they have letters and numbers. This one says 6H on it. It's hard to see, but 6H. And the other one I have is 9H. I use a very hard pencil. The H number and the B numbers on a pencil tell how much clay and how much graphite are mixed. And the H's have more clay and less graphite, so they have less dark. The graphite is what makes it dark. That's the soot. That's the carbon. And the clay is kind of neutral, so a lot more neutral. So that was the ebony. The 9H is there. You can see that's a lot lighter next to it. And then that's the 6H. Wait, this is the 9H. I'll put it in between. You can hardly see it. The joke is that the one harder than the 9H is a nail. That's the 6. I can make that a little closer. Let's see that a little better. Oop. There we go. So that's the ebony, the 9, the 6. Then I have a 4B. The B is on the other side, which is like more carbon than clay. And the B is much darker. So you see the B is much darker. So it's a lot of, and then sometimes people use charcoal, which is really all 100% 100% carbon. And usually that smears really well, but the graphite smears too. So how do you smear it? How do you make it if you want to make the edge softened, if you want to make more gradients in the edges? This is what we talked about at the drawing bee, but I have one here. That's a tortillon. Or if you have a French accent, say tortillon with a French accent. Or think it. Okay, this is it. This is the package of them. Oh, I seem to be, there we go. Blending tortillon. They come in a little package. It costs about like 50 cents. It wouldn't think you'd buy a piece of rolled up paper, but there it is. Very fancy French tortillon. Okay. And yeah, it's really just so simple. You just rub it there. Probably everyone has done this, but it's worth going over. There, so we're rubbing it and we're making and smear it out. If you start with the line a little bit light and you smear it, you can start to get better and better gradients. And the further I go out, the lighter it gets, of course, because if you think about the material of it, you're spreading this carbon clay mixture. Yeah. Not to be confused with tortillas. Tortillon. Okay. Yeah, you're spreading this mixture of like physical particles that are clinging to the page, and you're pushing them with the piece of paper, and so as you get further away, it gets lighter. Another thing that happens is that the paper end of the tortillon starts to get the graphite on it, And eventually it becomes kind of like a very light drawing tool. So you can actually sketch. As I go up here, you can actually draw a little or fill in areas with that. You can deposit that carbon that's collected, that graphite that's collected on the end of it. So the tortillon is cool to spread, but there are other things that are also good. These, you may know, Q-tips, also very good for spreading graphite around. There's a guy online, if you search him up on YouTube, that uses cotton balls exclusively. And he draws in charcoal and he does all the shading with cotton balls, and he swears by the texture of the cotton and the way it absorbs and takes up the excess. So he says like rubbing a little bit can move the pigment a little bit, but rubbing a lot will start to pick it up. So it works both ways. It's a little bit like a spreader and a little bit like an eraser. And so cotton balls are good. This is like a piece of towel, excess towel. I find like cotton fabric is good. There we go. Cotton fabric is nice. It's like the cotton ball, but I get it's a little stiffer. You can spread it a little better. So cotton fabric works cool. And just a regular piece of paper towel, just any kind of paper, but paper towel is good because it's slightly absorbent. But if you want to do, so you get a little tooth to it. So paper towel is good to spread with. It's like the tortillon, but it's a softer paper. And you can roll them too if you want. And then there are techniques where you lift away using an eraser. So I'm going to put all the erasers up here. First one is called a kneaded eraser. And the nice thing about a kneaded eraser is it's like a little piece of putty, and you can shape it, you can stretch it. And if it gets dirty, you just kind of stretch it and fold it. And you can get a cleaner part. And one nice thing about the kneaded eraser is you can form it into a point as tiny as you want, like this. So if you have tiny little area that you just want to lift some graphite out of, you can just hit on that and it picks it up really well. You can just see there's a spot even you can see formed there really simply by the kneaded eraser. And then I have this other one that looks like a pencil, but it's actually an eraser. And that's good for edges. You can draw along and you can erase. So if you just wanted to smear on one side, you might go over a little and there's your edge. And then just regular old, this kind of like school erasers work good. Okay, and one other thing, and a brush I forgot to mention the brush. You can just use a regular old paintbrush. And if your graphite's soft enough, if you're using a B or something like that, you can use the brush to smear it around. That works really well. Oh, and then we have these guys, which are white. And so if you're working in a dark area, you want to put up, and you've got too much tone put down, and the eraser's not working well, you can use a white. This is like a chalk. This is like a white pencil. It's a Prismacolor white. And so you can draw in highlights, and a lot of people work that way. Some of the best portrait artists I know start with a gray piece of paper. They work on a gray, slightly above mid-gray paper. And then they do all of the shadow areas in some dark graphite or charcoal. And then they do all the highlights in white chalks. It makes a very beautiful image. Okay. So I'm gonna take that off. Oh, I know. I wanted to ask you all to do this one exercise. Let's do it really quick. I think we did one like this. But we'll do it again real quick. So you can practice this is a way to practice gradients and contrast yourself. And it's just simple shape drawing. So if you want to do a sphere, you can do a sphere. I think we talked about a sphere quite a bit before, but this one is the oval. Oops, I'm going to have to move a little bit. Sorry. There we go. I'm going to start with an oval. And then I'm just going to pretend that the light is up here, up high. This is our light source up above. So the light's coming down this way. And I'm going to make a gradated contour, a light contour, kind of around the middle of the egg like this. Not quite horizontal, but sort of following the shape of the egg. Something like that. And before we were more concerned with shading and we talked about the very shadow areas, and here I'm more concerned with setting up some gradients and thinking about how the light is grading and also in the contrast. So immediately what I want to do is I want to take away up in this upper edge a little bit of the pigment. So that's going to be very bright. And then as also we talked about, the darkest place is just here, what they call the Terminator. It's where there's the most contrast between light and dark, where the light comes in. So I'm going to give a little more shading there. And then I'm going to slowly grade it down to a lighter shade just below this. And then I'm going to leave it a little light at the bottom. That doesn't make a lot of sense logically, but the way it works is that there's going to be reflected light from the ground bouncing up to the bottom of the egg. So in fact, if you take an egg out of your fridge and put it on the table and look with the light in this position, you'll see that there is some brightness that bounces off the table. Okay, so a couple of things we want to do is throw in a horizon line. This just makes it easier to decide and also gives it more dimensionality. We talked a lot about the dimensionality. So we get that little horizon line. Okay, and then we're going to make another kind of oval that's going to be the shadow. Again, we're just going to estimate. It's not to be exact, but just kind of play. Okay, now here's another gradation is just under the edge of the egg, we're going to make it the darkest of the shadow. You don't have to start exactly dark, but start putting pigment there or start putting graphite there and gradate out lighter and lighter toward the edge of the shadow. And here's a good place to leave it pretty light and then get your smearing device and sort of smear it in. And one of the nice things is if you've used a soft pencil and you put down just enough, you can start to get it so it gets pretty light toward the edge. And all those lines will kind of disappear. Now you can see the shadow really forming under the egg. That gives us some great dimensionality. And you might want to go back to that Terminator line, that line there, and give that a little smear. There are whole schools of thought about the smearing technique, but definitely when you begin making great gradation, it's a good technique to practice. It can be very satisfying to get a smoothness to it. Okay, and then the contrast we're going to do is that we're going to work on the outside, the negative space around the upper left of the egg to define the upper edge of the egg with contrast and also to give it some dimensionality without drawing that line. So I'm going to do it with some vertical hatches. You can do it however you like, but I'm just going to start to make some hatch marks. And those themselves can gradate to lighter at the top, but what you want is a nice sharp start and to build up a darkness just at that edge. So if an edge has to be really bright, that can be defined. So you see how that makes that upper left front edge of that shape pop forward. You can take it all the way around it if you like. And it's fun to sort of vary that as you go. So make it dark you saw that in the picture I put up. It was like the background went dark to light. They were having a lot of fun with the gradient. It's fun to play with. This is a really, really simple set of marks. It doesn't take long to make. It's really, really easy to practice. It can be very satisfying because you can get a dimensional pop really quickly, and tons of variations. And you don't have to shade it. I did a lot of hatching, but you could shade it with little scrumbles or little circles, or little curlicues, anything you want to put. And if you want to know more about this exercise, there's a guy named Alfonso Dunn on YouTube who shades 9 of these in all different ways, and it's really fun to watch. So that's a fun practice. And that involves so you see the gradients there and you see the contrast there quite a bit. The gradients being the boundaries that are softly defined, and the contrast being the boundaries that are sharply defined. But again, boundaries itself, we had a whole week on boundaries. Boundaries itself is a property. And so boundaries is involved here, but looking at boundaries was about looking at what's on either side. When we did it, deep interlock and ambiguity, it was about a boundary, but a boundary that was ambiguous. And here's a boundary that's soft and a boundary that's sharp. So there's all kinds of ways of talking about it. But what we'll start to see is that these boundaries, are defining the centers, but at the same time, they're integrating the centers, and at the same time, there's no boundary. So it's great aspects of wholeness that you see, like not one, not two, this separate and not separate at the same time. Or the way we want to isolate this one thing in the world, but at the same time, it's part of the world. So interesting. The egg is a good practice. All right, I'm going to shut that, and I'm going to jump back to my other, and I have some more slides. Okay, can you hear me again? Yeah, looks like I'm back here. Cool. Okay, so hopefully continue to practice drawing the egg, or anything you want to draw that in your practice, paying attention to the boundaries there for gradients and contrast. I'm going to show some more examples. So here are some shapes. You can see, again, how gradation around the cone, around the edges of the torus, around the sphere, all play a part in giving it form, and the contrast also helps define the form, especially in the shadow in the negative space or in the background of the negative space. That's great. So where you see the parts of contrast are either the points of greatest curvature toward the eye, whether there's a Terminator, or in the negative spaces. So contrast and gradients working together. Okay, this is an artist named Vija Selmans. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. I think I am. Latvian artist. This picture was done around 1968. You may think this is a photograph, but this is some of the most amazing, realistic drawing, mind-blowingly detailed, beautifully shaded. And I guess this addresses more, Dan, you could chime in about what you were saying. But here you also see contrast being used as definition of edge, and then gradients just everywhere. There's a kind of a neutral gray in the sky, but all over. It's amazingly beautiful gradients. These are kind of painstakingly done.
John, what's the medium?
Yeah, that's graphite.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. She just had a show, kind of a retrospective show at the Met Brower last fall. And from a short distance, they look like photographs. And from up close, you can see the granularity of the paper and the medium. And it's, I don't know, it's just kind of gripping the level of detail and articulation, and just the beautiful blending, beautiful blending. You never see a line. It's all gradient, gradient, gradient. And here, maybe you see a line here, but there's a great contrast there to define it. And it's not defined by any linear progression of graphite. It's defined by two shapes and where they meet. So beautifully done. Here's another one just for an example. These I saw very recently. Unbelievable pictures of waves. There's really tremendous rendering out there. If you dig photorealistic rendering, there's a lot, and it's amazing. This is really amazing stuff. Really contemplative work. And at some point, she puts two drawings of the same photograph side by side, which and you find yourself trying to figure out, like, should she make them exactly reproduced exactly? It's incredible disciplined work. And again, a great example of contrast and gradient together. Okay, so we'll go back and sort of look a little bit at the history of it. All right, this is Giotto. We talked about Giotto before, the Arena Chapel frescoes. Giotto, I was thinking today, is like distinguished in art history as being the guy who did all this stuff before everybody. Like, he's always pointed to as the guy before the Renaissance. Like, look what Giotto was doing. He hadn't discovered all these things, but he was a good painter. But and there was some gradient being done to make form, but overall the picture, lighting in the picture is very flat. And if you were to look at this in terms of the properties of gradients and contrast, it's not distinguished in that way. Those properties don't stand out in here. But this is what was going on. Where was Giotto? Was 1320. Yeah, this was going on around 1320. This was the state of the art of representational painting. And then came Leonardo. It's great to study his drawings if you're interested in gradients, and he was the master of gradients. So the way to say gradients and contrast in Italian is to say sfumato and chiaroscuro, which are great art history terms. Chiaroscuro is the definition of form by light and dark, which is essentially contrast, and sfumato is definition of form by this kind of very, very gradual gradations. Sfumato means literally smoke. And so you think about, if you watch smoke disappear, you can't really quite tell when it's gone. It just kind of flies up and goes. And lots of Leonardo's edges are just so soft, especially up here in the neck. So soft, very hard to tell where one starts and next ends. And then he's defining lots and lots of shapes with deep, deep darks. So also very contrasty. So that Leonardo started this style. This is another drawing. And here's the edge. And we were talking about the sphere earlier with the contrast. So he's defining the edge of the face here with a very dark, contrasty area. But also he's got interspersed lights in it. It's kind of very beautifully done. So on the eye, there's a great contrasty area, and then some beautiful, beautiful gradations of light and dark going on. So also he's got lots of lines in it too. So it's really masterful in lots of ways. But here he's using gradient and contrast to define the edge of the face. This was probably, early 1500s. Was Leonardo. And then this guy is Michelangelo. He was about 25 years after Leonardo. He was born 25 years after Leonardo. This painting, this drawing, probably in the 1540, I think, something like that. Again, high Renaissance time. And look at the contrast that he's using on the edges, and then the beautiful gradients away. So there's that line, and then that kind of smear away from the line to create the shape. Happens all along the face, along the eye, along the ear. Very beautifully defined. So this got established, this use of light and dark in this contrasty areas to establish form, and also this gradations to help define the form. And it got to a kind of a high art here with Caravaggio. This would be up to about 1600 now. This is called late Renaissance, or it's starting a later period where the light, you see the contrast. This is a thing called the calling of Saint Matthew. I guess Saint Matthew is, here he is sleeping at the table, but he's getting called out, and here's the light, which is supposed to be like the light of God or something like this. And the huge line, this huge diagonal line, great contrast. Look how contrast is used to tell the whole story. Because there's a guy down here pointing with his hand, and everybody's pointing at St. Matthew, but the light is really the story of this line and how it comes in. And everybody's face, when you examine this picture, is defined by light and dark. And that was Caravaggio's style. Another thing that really defined Caravaggio was this very dark areas. Look how much of the painting, this is maybe, it's not quite a quarter, but over an eighth of the painting is just dark black area. So yeah, he created the void there up in the upper left of the painting, and then to the right, amazing contrast, dark below the light. And by painting such a dark area, it makes the light look that much brighter. Like, how do you make something look at the side of this guy's face so bright? It's because it's so dark next to it. That's the power of the contrast. So if you want something really to stand out in form and you want it to look really bright, yeah, paint a lot of dark around it. That's what you see here. This back is so dark. So Caravaggio, master of that. If you like that style, master of that. And that developed through a whole series of changes and lots of guys painting with light and dark. Chiaroscuro was the way to go until we get up here to Rembrandt. This is kind of almost a culmination of it. This is just before, toward the end of Rembrandt's time, Impressionism came in, and the creating and the modeling of form was less important. But Rembrandt, probably around 1620, this is a character in a costume with a turban that he painted, and this has a great properties, good shape, and he's got the void again up here. But he's using contrast and gradients in a beautiful way. He's using gradients in the background, and he's using here down on the lower right contrast to show the form. But there's also contrast between the brightness on the face and the brightness on the hand. So you can really, the hand is there and it's pretty bright on its own terms, but dark compared to the face. And that really puts the emphasis here. So there's contrast that way as well. So that was a great time period for studying those two properties. And Rembrandt was a real master of light. If you want to see great examples of it, contrast, look at Rembrandt paintings. Okay, so Tracy's dog's barking. Hold on, I'm gonna mute you, Tracy. It wasn't Terry's dog this time. Okay. Yeah, so, wow, it's taken a while so far, but I want to show you some other examples of contrast and gradients in other senses besides just the shading sense that Christopher Alexander points out. And this is one that he shows for contrast. This is a Shaker schoolroom, and he's very interested in these bars that cross the room right here and how much they create a sense of place and a sense of wholeness in the room and distinguish the room with some style simply by a line, just because the contrast of the line really stands out. If they were closer to the color of the wall, they wouldn't create quite the space in the room. And let's see, this guy, there's a website called I Am Ronan, and he does a lot of work with Christopher Alexander, and he went ahead and painted out the bars just to give you a side-by-side. So I put his picture up here too. And I do think that there's a greater sense of wholeness and space in the schoolroom on the left with the bars in there. So they're used as coat hooks, so that has some functional purpose. So you could argue that, but I think it has a great purpose for creating a real whole space, a real living space there, a much more interesting space than without. So that's one sense of contrast that Christopher Alexander would point to, using contrast in design to create wholeness in space. This one he points to, and he says that he's not happy with, and he says that stairway is contrast, but it's really just coming from the glare. And I want to read you the quote. Okay. So it's talking about contrast. I use this rule of contrast to help people understand the 15 properties. Draw diagrams, sketch something which has the property in it. So try to find the property of contrast and put it in there. But it is not enough to catch the property as you believe it is defined. To succeed, you must make a thing which has the property and which gains deeper feeling because of the presence of the property. Only when you have managed that can you be sure that the meaning of the property has not eluded you. So I guess it's his feeling that the staircase isn't really, how does he say it? Yeah, gains a deeper feeling because of the presence of the property. So do you get a deeper feeling because this is contrasty, or is it just, like he says, just glare? You have to ask yourself that. Here in the schoolroom, because of the presence of contrast, it really kind of creates a deeper feeling into the space. And here in this, does it create a deeper feeling in the space, or it's just contrast? It's just because the light is shining behind it. That's the question you can ponder on that one. Okay, here's another example for gradients that he uses. And so gradients, besides being the change of light to dark values, is also a size change. And so he points out on the Golden Gate Bridge, this tower is big, smaller, 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 like that. That's gradation. That's a gradient change. And gradients can be a very beautiful property. Like here, it could have just come straight up, but in fact, using the changes creates more and more centers of attention, more and more interest, and more visual interest in the whole design as it goes. So I think that's a more whole design, creates more wholeness. Okay, so I picked out some skyscrapers, found some pictures of skyscrapers because I think of them as not tapering. This is the one on the far left. This is one that was just built on Park Avenue. This is kind of the state of the art of Manhattan apartment building. I think it's 75 stories. It's something huge. It's like the 25th tallest building in the world now, or something like that. And look, it's just completely straight. There's absolutely no gradation. And not only that, but there's no gradation in the size of the windows or anything. So Christopher Alexander would not give this high marks for wholeness. And then there's a few others here just to show you what's happening now. When he was working on pattern language, it was in the height of modern architecture in the glass box era. And most of the buildings look like the one on the left, but with just glass exterior panels and things like that. We still see a lot of glass, but here, because of computer technology and the ability to model and build all kinds of shapes and designs, yeah, look what's happening in architecture. You're getting beautiful gradation and curves. This one is pretty straight, this fourth one, but look at this last one. It's amazing visual variation, amazing variation in the angles, all kinds of stuff. So there's some variation. This goes back to early this gradation, but here was the state of the art in 1920s. 1930s when this was built, and these were called setbacks or ziggurats, and that was done as a way of tapering up to the top of the building. You see those a lot in older buildings in New York. That's how that gradation was done, these step backs. But they're nice in some ways because they create these terraces and little balconies that happen. If you've ever been in one of these buildings, lots of these exterior window spaces have doors and little ways to get out onto those. So that's kind of nice. There's another reason that it's really nice, and that is that if you set the building back, depending on how high the setbacks are and how deep they are, it allows more light into the spaces in the building. Along that edge, you get more light, and then down on the ground, you get more light. So there was an artist, Saul LeWitt, who I've talked about before, is a 1960s conceptual artist. And he wrote an article at one point in Arts Magazine about how all buildings should have these because they let so much more light into the city. And he thought they were much more pleasing aesthetically. There's the setbacks, and here's a pyramid, which is on the same ziggurat design. This one is in Chichen Itza in Mexico. You can see that's kind of setback design. So he was influenced by the setbacks in the city buildings and also in these early Mayan architectural forms as was Joseph Albers. And he made Solowit made this pyramid. This was one of his last sculptures. A systematic work of cinder block, these setbacks. Anyway, too regular for Christopher Alexander, I think. But this was, as we said at one point, something about modernism to go against that sort of organic variation. That's the state that Solowit got to. Okay, so we're back to the bowls, and that is a little bit about contrast and gradients. I'm getting up against the time, so I didn't think it would take that long, but there you go. So probably next week I'm going to do, I'll do, I think simplicity and intercom, or not separateness. I'm going to do one of the more esoteric properties, and then I may take a week off for around Labor Day. And I need to catch up on some things. So that's be like 23 or 24 classes so far. We've been going for a while. So yeah, there'll be a short break. And I think all the classes are up online now, but Dan pointed out to me there are some times some of the materials that I mentioned in the lecture missing. So if you come across that, if you listen to one and I haven't posted something, just drop me a line, because I'm not perfect and so probably just didn't do it. But I do my best to get all the pictures and stuff up, and it's on that drawingyourownpath.com/blog site where all that material should be. I want to make it available for you. So yeah, don't beat me up. Just let me know and I'll put it up there. Okay, so we got a minute or two if there are questions, and then I'll be around probably for 20 minutes or so after class to answer. So yeah, you have something, Terry?
Yeah, I do. I'm not understanding the time frame of the Transamerica building being built in San Francisco. If Christopher Alexander had a chance to comment on that, or if that was after he had written about wholeness. Do you remember seeing anything that he had commented on the Transamerica building? Because it's just this huge pyramid shape, and it looks really out of place in this city.
I haven't read it, but maybe I'll look around. I think that's a good question to know.
Yeah.
And again, he does sometimes say he doesn't like stuff or stuff's, but he more or less just tries to evaluate it in his sort of objective criteria about how much wholeness it has. So he might find some parts of it which are quite whole.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah, it would be. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I'd like to know myself.
Thank you.
Okay. Cool. Well, it's great to see everybody, and thank you again for being here. And I'm going to stop the recording, but I'll hang out like I said. And yeah, it's the hour, so I'll see you next week.
Hey, John, thank you very much. This is really great.